Today, life, the universe, and the social media ban. Hello again, it's Martin, author from Digital Finance Analytics World. That is post covering finance and property news. Well, today I went live with Adam Stokes over on his channel discussing the social media ban and the broader implications, and well, we got quite philosophical in terms of the meaning of life. So this is my edit of his show. I hope you enjoy it.
G'day viewers, I'm Adam Stokes. Welcome back to the channel where today we're talking about a world first led by Australia where we have a social media ban for those under 16. The concern I have and the questions I seek answers to is, why is the government doing this? Is it really about protecting the children? And where will we go from here? Is it an extension of the mis- and disinformation bill that we were battling against in the past? Or is it truly just about doing the right thing by our kids? To guide me through this, to give us knowledge and insight, I brought our longtime friend, Martin North. Welcome to the show, Martin. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Hello, nice to be back on again. And this is a big deal and an important conversation. So let's use the freedom of the air that we've got at the moment, at least, to share our thoughts.
Well, if you saw the thumbnail, I, of course, imposed a gag over both of our mouths where we weren't allowed to speak. That's right. And I'll just give the viewers a bit of a background here. So Martin and I come from very different worlds in the sense that I'm more of an economist crypto guy and he's more of a macro traditional economist type of guy, but we're both philosophers and we both seek the truth and we both share the same values. Martin and I met many years ago when we were standing up against the cash ban. Cash is something that we both see as a type of freedom, a freedom of association, freedom of information we enjoy, freedom of commerce, freedom of speech. And then we worked together, Martin, when it came to the misinformation and disinformation bill. And now I can't help to think, Martin, that we're working together as a round two to the misinformation and disinformation bill that didn't quite pan out for the government as they hoped. But maybe this is an extension of it. So let's go back to square one. What is the social media ban and what does it really mean?
Well, you need to understand that we're on a journey here, and the current ban that's just come in, as at Wednesday, is part of a broader program of initiatives that the government are pushing. And, the misinformation, disinformation bill got defeated in Parliament, quite rightly, but it was essentially around censorship and about who could control what was being said in social media, who defined what truth was. And weirdly, they said, well, universities are fine and the government is fine, but everybody else isn't, basically. Now, that got thrown out for all the right reasons, and we went through that. So I regard the current under 16 program that's now in force as the demon seed, as it were, of the misinformation and disinformation bill. But we should be very clear, this is not the end of the process. There's a whole lot more stuff coming, and we'll cover some of that shortly. But just in terms of what's happened, we've now got this set of situations where we've got Facebook, Instagram, Kik, Reddit, Snapchat, Threads, TikTok, Twitch, X, and YouTube. Now, under 16s can't have accounts on these particular channels, although they can use Discord, they can go to GitHub, Google Classroom, Lego Play, Messenger. So it's a bit of a weird range. And of course, there was some coming in, coming out. YouTube wasn't initially on the list, then was added. So it's a bit of a mess. And the idea is that people are now not able to have accounts if you are under 16. But of course, it also means that you have to prove that you are over 16. And there are a number of different ways that the various social media companies are going at the moment. Some people are finding that they're over 16, but they're being challenged to prove they are. And there are various ways, from the government ID to a photo or whatever, photo checking, AI-based, none of which is 100% accurate. And actually all of the various people who were involved in this testing process over a few months admit that this is not 100% right. And they're also saying, look, this is the start of a process and it won't necessarily be tuned perfectly on day one, as they would say. They're also saying there may be other entities, social entities that might be added to the list later. But the net bottom line is that those people now are excluded. But as you'll see as we go on, there's a lot more to it than this. And I wanted to just put this one up because this was actually quite, I thought, a powerful observation. What on earth is this? Annika Wells is drunk on power. But the internet is only a threat to the Labour government because they are a bad government. And I think there's a lot of truth in that, because if you look carefully, what's happened is that it's been this Labour government, who I think is a pretty bad government, looking at it on a number of different angles, from a cost of living perspective, from a social cohesion perspective, from high migration perspective, a whole long list. So in a way, going back to the misinformation, disinformation story, the misinformation, disinformation story was about the government trying to control the narrative. They felt that the social media was getting away from them. And even now, of course, you've got a lot of politicians trying to use social media. If you think of the recent Claire O'Neill, for example, on housing, and those little videos she keeps popping up, which are actually not telling the full story on housing. But it is, unfortunately, a problem. And it's worth just saying that through this process, there were lobbyists involved. And I just want to highlight this. This is actually from Oz Integrity. Our Labour government has engaged lobbyists to lobby itself to publish social media bans. The U16 media ban is a government-funded and endorsed engineered campaign against Australians. And they're quoting here the 36 months proprietary limited, which is a business profiting off the social media ban they've engineered. And the question is, do they care about kids at all? Is this just about monetization? Is it about imposing government control? And in fact, this was published on Crikey, social media ban lobby group, funded and co-staffed by firms making gambling ads. And, teen social media ban included a $150,000 package for potential sponsors and a signed letter from Prime Minister Albanese. Please explain. Now, in response to all this, of course, some youngsters have said, well, fair enough, it was nice while it lasted. But of course, youngsters are pretty creative individuals. And therefore, in some cases, there are people perhaps using VPNs or other mechanisms to still be able to use social media, create accounts with different names or different age and all those things there. But the other amusing thing from here, you can see here that the story here is that some of the youngsters are coming up and saying, well, I'm still on. So, it's a little bit of a process here. Now, let me say it straight up, Adam. There is definitely a question here about the influence of social media on people and the fact that some people have definitely been harmed by social media content. And that is true whether you're young or whether you're old. And clearly youngsters are less able perhaps to discriminate what's going on in social media, and therefore there are stories of bullying, people actually creating problems for themselves, self-harm, or worse. So there is a problem at the kernel. But the question you've got to ask yourself before we get on to what's coming next is, does the social media ban really solve the problem, which is that there is content on these social media platforms that should not be on those platforms? But rather than actually policing specific content, what they're doing is trying to excise certain people from accessing it, youngsters in particular. What does that say about the power of the big social media players around the world? I don't think the US are very impressed with what they're doing, but if in fact there was more direct intervention on the social media platforms, most of which are US, that would probably create an issue, with Trump and Australia. So in a way, this approach where they're focusing on young people is a bit of a red herring in my view. We have to do something. We have to clean up content. But the question is this effective? And I'll just probably hand back to you, Ad, and I want to make one other point here. Even now, of course, this is actually being followed closely. So as the ABC has reported, and the BBC as well, how Australia's world-first social media ban for children has left tech firms scrambling. And there is a big sense around the world that other people are watching. So if it works well in Australia, then maybe it'll be there somewhere else as well. And so there's a lot to play for here. And as we'll see later, as we get into also what happens next, there is a lot to play for internationally too. But anyway, so to sum up, demon seed of misinformation, disinformation bill, questions about its effectiveness, and questions in my mind about why they're really doing it.
I'm looking forward to and equally scared to see where this conversation takes us, because I'm concerned about what lays in the future. But let's lay the foundation a bit further. We understand that the claimed intent was to protect children. We understand the claimed intent is that there's a lot of cyberbullying and inappropriate content. And the main thing that I thought was hearing was about cyberbullying. Where it gets philosophical, where we'll talk a bit later, is about, well, whose responsibility is it to look after children? Is it the parents or is it the state? And that's a whole video in itself. And then, as you discussed, and we discussed many weeks ago or even months ago, who gets to determine truth? Do I determine truth, or you, or the government, or the universities, or the banks? Who gets to determine truth? Is my God real, or is your God real? Is there 2 genders or 300 genders? Who gets to make that call? That parked aside, when we go to the actual mechanics of this ban, I was expecting something to happen here in Australia where suddenly I would, as an adult, be required to prove that I'm an adult online. And nothing actually happened. And this is where I actually try to seek the actual mechanics. Okay, so this is what we'll unpack. So nothing happened in the sense, and we'll get to that yet word in a second. Nothing happened in the sense that Prime Minister came on the television and said, this is my proudest moment in government and so forth, and look at us, we're a world first. And it's like, okay, but in the background, I'm thinking, well, nothing's actually changed for me. How does the government know that I'm over 16? But then I equally thought, well, how does the government know that the child is under 16? And then I thought, well, how does the government work around VPNs? And as you mentioned, and a lot of young people obviously know, they're a lot smarter when it comes to computers, and I'd argue the government, in bypassing many of these systems. And if we have these current systems in place that young people and even older people are going to bypass, then I would think that the government's going to come in with even harder draconian methods to make sure that you somehow log on. So let's go back to the basics. I realize that this is evolving, but how do they actually police mechanically right now who's under 16 and who's over 16?
Yeah, well, it is an interesting question, right? Because the whole idea was to carve out protections for young people. So they picked 16. Why 16? It's an interesting question. Why not 18? Why, when can you drive, and, when can you vote, and all those things? Interesting question. How do you prove that you're actually over 16? Well, as I said, there are various mechanisms, including, of course, the AI checking a picture. So somebody actually I saw posted earlier, well, I posted a picture of my mum and got back on that way, right? So, and I've also had a number of people on YouTube who are older than 16 saying that they actually were challenged and had to prove that they were actually over 16 to get back into YouTube. So it depends on whether there's other information. I suspect if you have an account on YouTube that's connected to a credit card, for example, they probably are making certain assumptions then about your age, because you can't get a credit card if you're under a certain age, right? So that could well be it. So if they hold credit card details, then potentially you are actually over 16. So no issues. I'm just hypothesizing that could be one of the things there. So there are a number of different mechanisms. They did do a series of tests, and in the results of that tests, and it was all published, they did conceive that it was not 100% accurate either way. And as a result of that, it means that there will potentially be people chopped that shouldn't be chopped, and there will be people who will be underage and will still continue. And that's, so it's not meant to be 100%, it's sort of give or take a little bit. And the idea, I suppose, is it will settle down. Now, just one thing on bullying. I was at school years ago, and I was bullied at school. And it was almost, frankly, a rite of passage. It was part of growing up. You sort of had to find your way around, and you had to work out how to deal with it. And I didn't tell my parents. I just sort of said, well, okay, this is not good. I got to find a way around it. Worked through it, and ultimately, went through that phase. There is a phase in life as you grow up, as you sort of start testing boundaries and things, and you end up with realizing there are other people who are actually wanting to assert their authority more. So bullying is not just done in social media. It's bullying is life, right? It's part of life. It's part of growing up. So the question I've got is, firstly, with this bullying, this cyberbullying, is it incrementally worse? Or is it just a different platform doing the same thing that a lot of people would experience, and a small number of people would have really big problems? And that's the first question. The second question is, with this whole approach, where the social media side of it means that you get people that you can interact with who are not of your age, who have very different agendas. That is true. And so those issues within youngsters interacting with social media means they need to have more of an education, more of an understanding. I think the education system has failed here, because it seems to me that we should be teaching our youngsters a lot more about social media and digital capabilities and how to deal with it, rather than taking them away. And then suddenly, when you get over that age limit, bingo, you could have open slather again, because you're going to have no experience of being able to actually navigate this online world. The online world is not going away, right? The online world is going to continue to develop and evolve. It is part of being human now. So we should be training our youngsters and working with our youngsters. So it comes back to your interesting question, which is a dead important question. Whose responsibility is it? And I would say that in some cases, parents have actually abrogated their responsibility, or found it difficult because they don't have enough understanding themselves of social media and how it works to be able to be good guides for their kids. The schools can't do it because the education system is not up to it either. So we've actually thrown our youngsters to the wolves. And I'm not sure that this particular solution, before we talk about the evolution, which is the big question I think we can get onto, I'm not sure this solution is really going to solve the real fundamental issue that we've got.
I let's put our tinfoil hats on for a moment, but unfortunately sometimes the conspiracy theories continue to turn out to be conspiracy facts. So we've discussed this on my channel. I think you and I have discussed it as well. When it comes down to money, when money's broken, we pan it right out to the layer one of money. And so money's broken, so both parents had to work, and it was under the banner of liberation, shall we say. You don't have to have a family. You can go to the workplace. And it's like, okay, well, now you're working. So both mum and dad are at work. Okay, well, I guess we're really free then. And then the anti-family courts take the father out of the home. So you've got the mother at work, the father out of the home, and the kids left to who? Who raises the kids then? And of course, then we look at the daddy state. And again, tinfoil hat stuff, but it just seems so clear to me. It's so obvious. If you break down the family unit, you remove the father from the home, you push the mother into the workplace, you fly the flag of this is all liberation. Meanwhile, we, as in the state is now going to protect your kids. So the state just broke down the family one way or another, through broken money, through anti-family courts, through pushing both parents into the workplace, or one out of the home and one into the workplace. Then the state is going to raise the children. And if you look at I don't know if you know about the Safe Schools program many years ago, the Safe Schools program, the word Safe Schools program sounds, well, how could you be against the Safe Schools program? But it was, some of those components of that Safe Schools program was very perverse, very concerning. And I spoke to a lot of parents who were, to be blunt, they were teaching little girls how to, I've got to be careful with my words, but it was a schools program. So even as an adult, I'm not comfortable talking about it, yet they were teaching kids how to do certain things to themselves with certain implements around the home, if you can read between the lines. And this is a Safe Schools program. So now you have the government coming in and say, right, we've done all of this, or you can imply that we've done this, and now we're in a situation that we, as we mentioned before, we're going to determine what truth is, and we're going to determine what your kids can see. And someone on my program recently said something quite profound. They said they're simply just choosing whoever it is, the government, left or right, that the people who lobby the government, I don't know who's in charge. I'd like to think the government's in charge, but I'm not convinced they are. But in any case, the argument was, if we take away freedom of speech and freedom of information and freedom of association and the freedom of choice and the freedom of discussion, you're left with the narrative. And who determines the narrative? Well, now that you've got a centralized media, you've taken away free speech, you've got a malleable child per se who doesn't have a father or a mother at home for whatever reason, whether they're both working or they're broken or so forth. What is the child left with? Now, the child is left then with their peers. And what is the peer left with? Well, whatever information they're getting. And where are they getting their information from? And it goes, in my mind, it's all going back to state indoctrination. Now, I hope I'm completely wrong. And I hope someone can come back with facts and say, dude, you're a conspiracy theorist. You're crazy. And I'd be happy to be proven wrong. But it's almost so clear. What are your thoughts on this thesis?
Well, I think there's three observations. The first is clearly households are under huge financial pressures. I see it in my surveys. More people are working multiple jobs. The banks, when they think about mortgage repayments, are now assuming 2 full-time incomes, not one and a bit, but 2 full-time incomes. So if you are a typical structured household with 2 adults, they are both expected to work full-time. So that immediately changes the dynamic when it comes to the household control, management, and being there. Now, I'm not saying that people should be forced to work or forced not to work, but the truth is people are being forced to work because of the economic constraints that they're under because of the way that government policies run for 20 to 30 to 40 years. So that's the first point. The second point is the social engineering which has followed from that. And I believe that people should be free to do what they want to do, but they also have a responsibility for the decisions they take. And if you decide to have kids, that's a big responsibility. That responsibility should fall on the parents. And it also, I think, means that parents need to actually weigh up whether they actually really want to do this or not. And there's an interesting debate in the UK that they allowed government money to be paid for the first kid and the second kid, but not for the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth, because earlier on, the other side of government in the UK said, well, hang on a moment, people were having more kids because they got more money from government if they had more kids. So people were having 4, 5, 6 kids because they got more money from government. So they turned that off. Now, the Labour government's just reinstated that. So there's an interesting conundrum where people are actually forced to work. People think, well, hang on, if I have more kids, I actually can get more money from the government, which will help my finances. But what environment are we actually creating for those kids to be growing up in? And particularly if they're not being able to be housed well, a lot of people living in rented accommodation or temporary accommodation. So there's a problem there. And the third one is the education system is broken as well, insofar that over the years, there's been more and more of a fixation on specific dimensions within education, maths or English or getting a score or whatever. And in all of that, I think they've lost the critical central tenet of education, which is helping a youngster to grow and thrive and develop. That includes play, that includes music, that includes doing other things. It includes a widening of experiences. That's all gone. So education has become, frankly, a machine to bring people who are going to be workers later. So, these are big issues that I'm talking about here, but this is, for me, some of the underlying things that are going there. And then overlay this, social media. People, if they're bored and they're young, what do? They go on social media. What do they find on social media? Well, if they look hard enough, they're going to find some horrible stuff. That is, so in a way, the social media story is a subset of a much bigger discussion about the nature of society and the nature of what it means to be a child and what protections children need. And very importantly, where do the responsibilities lay between the adults who created the child or who, indirectly created the child or look after the child and the state? The state doesn't, to my mind, have as a significant role as I think Alban would want us to accept. But it comes back to what happens then when parenting fails. Who picks up the pieces? And those are big social questions. it's made worse by the fact that previous generations perhaps would have had, grandparents being able to be part of the family. Less so now because people are in more isolated communities and moving around and all those things. So, I mean, there's a big social. So, what I'm saying to you, Adam, there's a big social context which has not been discussed, but which should have been discussed as part of this, even before the ban came in.
I had a very interesting comment the other night on my live show from a single parent who said they were happy with the social media ban. And it was good to hear another side, because I actually hadn't heard anyone who was happy about it. And it was good to have this opinion coming in. And this individual of my community, I won't say their name, but I'm glad they said this comment. They said, I'm happy to see the social media ban because I'm a single parent and I'm not at home to constantly watch my kids and see what they're doing. Now, I'm not quoting verbatim, but to me, that comment struck very powerfully to me, because it was an example of, well, this kind of reinforces my sentiment that when the family unit breaks down, and you added a great layer there when you said grandparents, because of course that's something within our culture. I lived in Asia for many years, and in Asia, grandparents were an integral part of the family. Yep. Even when I lived in Spain, the grandparents were an integral part of the family, but not so much in the Western societies. In Australia, I just don't see it that much. But in any case, you can see that if you've got a married parent, that is, a kid has mum and dad, as you mentioned, and as we can see, and economically, they both have to go to work. But if you have a single parent, that single parent will typically have to go to work. But then you've got the other layer of this, is that when you spoke about basically paying for more and more kids by the state, you encourage the behavior that you pay. So if the state encourages the behavior of having lots of kids, and certainly in my life, I've seen certain mothers have lots and lots of kids to lots and lots of dads, because it's lots and lots of money and lots of rooms. Now, of course, not everyone is in that situation, I realise, and before I'm screamed at by the audience saying, how dare you? The truth is, I have people who work, friends who work in Centrelink, very high-ranking people in Centrelink, and they tell me about the fourth, fifth, and sixth generations of kids who just turn into adults and just go to Centrelink, and for our international viewers, that's a government shopfront, the social state, funding this lifestyle. And it is a very interesting paradigm. It's like, well, hang on a second. If I go to work, I don't get to see my kids. But if I go to work, I don't get to see my kids. But if I choose not to work and the state rewards me for that behavior, and I get more money, I get more money to stay at home with my kids. And the more kids I have, the bigger the public housing I can get. And the counter to this is, well, maybe that's a really good thing because then the parent gets to stay home with the kids. But of course, no, then you're addicted to the daddy state. You must comply with the daddy state because they are your source of income. So it's a whole bloody mess. And in my mind, it all goes back to the layer one, and the layer one is money. But unless you've got a further comment on that, Martin, what I really want to move into now is, what do you believe is the real intent of this? Is it really about protecting children, or is it something else?
Well, let's just, before we go on to that, let me just make a point. It's interesting that Reddit has now officially challenged the High Court, in the High Court, to overturn the nation's first social ban. They're arguing the law infringes on free political speech and poses serious privacy risks. Now, that's very interesting, because effectively that means that people are worried, because if you're having to provide information to prove that you're under 16 or over 16, that's part of the story here, free speech. And there's another High Court case with youngsters that's already underway, arguing that free speech and expression is being trimmed. So I think we'll probably see more of this bubbling through. But there is a broader canvas here, and that's where I think we should take the conversation, because we're not going to be able to solve the broader social issues that we're touching, although there's probably room for another conversation at some point about why is it that society is degraded to the point that it has. As you say, is it a financial-led thing? Is it a political-led thing? Is it just that, some people just don't care anymore? I don't know, but let me take the conversation forward. And to help, I just want to refer to this. This is actually, there was a very good article in The Conversation, and it was headed, "The social media ban is just the start of Australia's forthcoming restrictions, and teens have legitimate concerns. And they go on to say in this one, Australia is about to dial up the volume on increased measures to further regulate the internet through the impending industry codes. These will eventually be implemented across services, including search engines, social media messaging services, online games, app distributors, equipment manufacturers and suppliers like smartphones, tablets, and so on, and AI chatbots and companions. And in fact, they said over the Christmas break, we'll start to see hosting services and ISPs that deliver sexual content, including pornography, alongside material categorized as promoting eating disorders and self-harm, impose various restrictions, including increased age checks. Now, there are some concerns these codes might be overreached. And they went on to say, there's been a massive global interest in the new social media legislation. The platform's methods so far for varying young people's ages have shown mixed effectiveness, and new measures are scheduled to come into force before the new year, which will include further restrictions. And here's the list. So you can see here that there are codes registered in June which apply to all of those areas, including social media platforms, internet service providers. And the codes are drafted by the tech industry and represent what the industry considers to be proportionate and reasonable measures to enhance online safety. This includes adopting good practice measures, including implementing major platforms, introducing new obligations that will require the online industry to improve children's online safety, as well as giving adults greater control over what they see. And what that means is that from the 27th of December, effectively, it's going to be more stuff. Now, the question then is, well, what's really going on here? Why? What does it really mean? And I think that so far as what I can see, this is very much part of a broader trend in Australia. And I want to go to this slide now because John Ruddock, MLC, posted, Albo is more obsessed with his internet censorship crusade than he is about anything in his lifelong political career. He said it's the most paramount thing he'll do this term. And they're saying internet censorship is needed to prevent youth suicide and anorexia nervosa. And he went on to say, so what's going on? Why is the left wing of the Labour Party so intensely invested in censorship? And why Australia? And, there's an interesting debate. Nobody quite knows. Let's use Australia to introduce global internet censorship. Or we sell it as saving kids. So is this an experiment? Is this something that effectively is perhaps because, we've proved that we actually are prepared to be a bit more flexible and, we can be more guinea pigged than other countries. My hunch is Australia is being chosen to be the global guinea pig to bring the 1984 style government censorship that bans ideas that thugs in charge do not like. Backing up his theory is the chorus of big government promoters around the world simultaneously cheering on censorship in Australia, like Ursula von der Leyen in the EU and other what he calls dumb celebs as well. And, this is misinformation, disinformation on steroids. And the expanded industry codes for broader platforms coming in from March 2026 extends the duty of care to social media, messaging apps, etc., etc. Then comes the Digital Duty of Care Act, followed by mandatory digital ID. So, is there something here that is then taking us to a digitally controlled future? And is this what the real agenda is about? So is this something where the U16 is just the first proxy for something bigger? Mm-hmm. That is the question. Now, of course, if you go back to the other election that we just had, that wasn't even discussed. There was no election promise to do this. Mm. There was nothing actually in the manifesto or in any of the documentation from the Labour Party, and yet this is what they're doing. So, yeah, if you want to be a conspiracy theorist, and I tend to perhaps wonder sometimes whether conspiracy theorists are simply just people who see the future early, are we actually now moving to a point where digital control is the ultimate end state? And, using the digital ID as the way to prove who you are and what you can access is quite a convenient way forward. So, yeah, we have to do this because we're protecting our kids. It sounds all a bit too credible to me to be quite concerning.
What is a digital ID? Like, let's break it down. So we know what an ID is. Show your identification. I got to go buy a beer when I'm a youngster. I prove my age. I get pulled over by a cop. I prove I am who I say I am, and I've got a license. I open a bank account. I pull out a card to prove that I am who I say I am. So anti-laundering and so forth. What is the difference between a physical ID and a digital ID, and what's the danger of it?
Well, it seems to me that the problem we have is that those physical identities that you have, it tells people who you are in a particular circumstance, but it's harder to join the breadcrumbs together. The thing about the online world and the digital ID is if you have a common hook, then everything you have, everything you do is effectively coming up to that ID point. And then the question is, well, who is actually issuing the digital ID? The government, of course, with the government digital ID is very keen for you to have a digital ID so that they can hang everything off it. And of course, the ATO would love that because then they can see everything. Well, the government's going to be quite interested to see who you support and where you go and what you do. The private sector would love it because they can actually build a bigger picture. We've already sold our private information through the back door simply because it was free. So they used us. So we've already monetized. So the hook of digital ID has a powerful controlling factor and a powerful economic factor. But I want to focus on the controlling factor. If you get to the point where everything is actually accessible thanks to your digital ID, and the government decides to turn your digital ID off or makes it conditional on certain things that you do or don't do, social score by another name, it means that suddenly the state is way, 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 way more powerful than now. And so the difference between the breadcrumbs of a passport and a driving license and the bits of plastic and the bits and pieces, right? And this digital ID that has the principal connection point is I think fundamentally different. And the other point, if everything is hooked to that digital ID, what happens if somebody gets hold of it?
Yeah.
You suddenly
it's a honeypot of information.
Yeah. You suddenly become effectively persona non grata. You won't be able to do anything. You won't be able to move money around. You won't be able to do anything at all. So the security and risk aspects of having this one digital hook is, I think, something that people haven't really fully understood either. So I am against this idea of having this one identifier. And by the way, it gives the central bank access to CBDC. You link it to your CBDC. If you do the right things, we'll give you some money. If you don't do the right things, we won't give you money. So it is a controlling, top-down, thou shalt, 1984 world where digital ID is at the heart of it. And unfortunately, there are people in power, and frankly, if you listen carefully to the likes of the World Economic Forum and other people, there are a lot of people who would love this because they would actually then, the technocrats will be in control. They'll be able to influence everybody, pull all the levers, and well, you have lost your freedom. And that's unfortunately the slippery, slidey slope that I see this. And, this is Australia's under 16 social media ban was never about protecting kids. It's a Trojan horse to force every single Australian internet user to upload government ID for mandatory age verification from 27th of December 2025 while funding taxpayer cash to prop up dying industries. So this is the point. So there's a lot more going on here. And I do think the digital ID question and the implications is where we ultimately come to.
The social score system seems something to worry about as well. I don't know if you've ever seen a series on Netflix called Black Mirror.
Yep.
And do you know the episode I'm referring to where they had
Yes.
this social score system, and in the end the woman goes crazy because she's trying to go to a wedding, and it was such a powerful episode. I always think about it. For those of you who don't know it, it's a series, Black Mirror on Netflix, and they go into all these futuristic scenarios. And one of these episodes was about a future where we had a social score, and there was a lady who was trying to be very nice. She was trying to do everything properly, and she basically was trying to get to a wedding, and she spoke to the checkout lady who was trying to get the rental car. She's trying to get the rental car, and things just cascaded down where she went from a really good a social score, to offending someone, to saying something to the police, to getting a crappier car, to not being able to recharge, to then hitchhiking. And then she went from just being a normal person, trying to maintain a high social score, to essentially ending up in a prison cell because her social score went too low. What I've been seeing also with artificial intelligence and these very intelligent cars now that are hooked up to networks where you buy a car. I don't know if you've heard about this, Martin. It's crazy. Yep. So it's subscription models to everything in your car. Basically, if you want an extra 10 kilowatts, you need a subscription to that. If you want to use the heated seats, you need a subscription. If you want to use... we were joking about if you want to use the brakes, you're going to need a subscription to that. But why would you do this? Well, of course, subscription models, you make a lot of money from it, but equally the car's recording all of your data, and then the car would tell the insurance companies, hey, Martin North typically drives 5 kilometres below the limit, give him a good score, or Adam Stokes is a bit of a heavy lead foot, you better put his insurance up because he drives a little bit faster than most people. And then you take it to a step further when you've got a CBDC linked to an ID, a digital ID. If you, as we've seen in China, as an example, so you're driving a car, you go through a speed camera, you don't even know you've gone through the speed camera, the money is immediately deducted from your bank account. So you have no right to reply, and if you do have a right to reply, well, you've already lost the money, and then you've got to try and claw it back. So when it all connects, you can see how quickly it would work. You upset someone, you lose your social credit score. There's another pandemic, you can't spend your money outside of this area. You cross a borderline, it automatically triggers to say, hey, Martin, you're out of your state. You go through a speed camera, the money is deducted from your account without any question unless you want to appeal it later, if you can appeal it later. And you can see that you would be in this society. And the thing that's scary, Martin, is that the technology actually exists. It's not, in this theory that we're going through, it's not, no, you'd need to do this and you need to do that. No, all the technology exists. We've got the cameras, we've got the internet, we've got the AI, we've got digital currencies, and we've now got a digital ID. And the last piece to the puzzle for all of this, Martin, I'm going to bring it into this question here, is it comes down to, does the government want to do it? Now, I thought that the government was about protecting the people. I thought that's what a government was for. It was about protecting the people, upholding law, moving a country forward. But I've released a survey recently to say to all my followers on X, I said, when have you felt poorest over the last 15 years? Now, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or 15 years ago? And the data shows quite clearly. Now, of course, it's a small sample size, but it's overwhelming, saying now is the time that people have felt the poorest. So as we go through this timeline, freedoms are eroding, laws are increasing, poverty is increasing, fear is increasing, rights are decreasing. So every single thing in my mind that a government should be doing to make things better, it appears, now maybe I'm wrong, I'm just one person, but in my life, I've never earned so much money, but never felt so poor. I've never had such a clean record, as in I've been alive longer than I was many years ago, but I've never felt so constricted with all of these rules and being treated as if I've done something wrong. Even though I haven't done anything wrong, I constantly feel like I'm being treated like I've done something wrong. I feel like I have a less of a voice now than when I was at university. And maybe that's because I was a uni kid and I had nothing to lose. But it just seems that the further along we go in time, the more things cost, the less freedoms we have, the more unhappy we are, and the more stressful life becomes. It comes back to this question. Will the government do this? Do they want to move into the 1984 scenario? And part B, if so, why so?
Well, it's an interesting question. And just before I answer that directly, let me remind you of the Carrington event. right? The Carrington event is actually related to solar storms. There was a really big event some years ago, many years ago actually, that pulled down a vast section of electronic infrastructure. In the days when computers hardly existed and we were reliant on, things like messages over wires and those sorts of things, it put a lot of people disconnected for quite a long period of time, and that to sort of rebuild it all, right? If we got a Carrington event of a similar ilk now, with the amount of technology that we have around the world, the whole of the world will be pretty much stuffed. So underlying all this digital world that we've got and all this sort of, magic that I'm talking to you and everything's watching us, and it's all predicated on a certain assumption that things will not get too disrupted. I think that's a big risk, right? I think there's a significant chance at some point the digital world that we know could get disrupted dramatically, whether it's a Carrington event or something else, whether it's a cyber attack or something else. So that's just a quick thought about the risks here. But coming back to your question, do governments want to do it? Well, governments feel less in control than they've ever done before. Why? Firstly, because the world's got more complicated, information is being shared more quickly, and there are not so many isolated pockets of huge power. There are now a more multipolar world where there are lots of people wanting to assert themselves. And so the political and economic shenanigans that we've got, Trump is part of this story of reasserting making America great again. Look at his overseas policy that his government published recently, talking about, I think Europe's falling apart, and I thought, well, Russia will love that, So there's a real question here about government's effectiveness to do the things that government wants to do. Now, why do they want to do the things they want to do? Because they're ineffective. So there's an interesting sort of circularity there. They're ineffective. They're going to try and pull extra levers to become more effective again. And some of the things that we're seeing in the US as examples of that. So that's the first point. The second point is democracy is failing. So if you look at it at the moment with regard to the last election, Albo came back with a massive majority, but on a minority of the primary vote. That's huge. Same in the UK. About 1/3 of people voted for Labour in the UK, and yet they got a massive majority. So the political system is struggling with the way that democracy is working or not working. And I would argue democracy is not working very well at all at the moment. So they're trying to think about how to buttress that. So when you put that in place, when you put in place the idea of we're living in a more uncertain world, and frankly, when we're living in a situation where a lot of our politicians are very small people with very limited capacity and capability, all of those things come together to say they're going to look for other levers. And so the digital revolution and the digital ID and the social score and the CBDC is a set of tools that gives them the control back. And that's the reason why I think this is a serious risk.
It's actually probably the perfect segue into what's happening as we're speaking. Silver just hit another all-time high. Gold's hitting all-time high. So you're looking at the silver chart here. I've now got to adjust this all-time high up to here. All-time high for gold, silver in US dollars, $64.38. These markets are moving quickly. Now, I believe it's all connected, and the reason why I believe it's connected is because, of course, you can't control the narrative, and if you can't control the money printer, then what can you control? So it seems that a lot of control. Is my audio still okay? It looks like I'm glitching at your end.
You're glitching. That extra app that you brought up has put a bit of pressure on. You need a better computer.
No. Yeah, I do. If everyone out there, all my audience understands this. I spent a fortune on a Hewlett Packard, like top of the line. And the line that I always say now, never ever buy an HP, ever. Like, I can only go on my experience. My Dell was magnificent. Many people say buy a Mac, and you and I agree with this. I think Apple has better hardware, but I hate the software. Yeah. Whereas Windows has better software, but I hate all the hardware that you can just tap on there. So all these first world problems.
So the secret is to spread it across multiple computers. I have 4 at the moment, all doing part of the stream, right? So
okay, right.
You're coming in on an HP. I've got a couple of others here because you can't rely on just one computer to do the heavy lifting. It's just too much. So
I can tell everyone it's not my internet connection. I've got like some of the best internet you can get in Australia. Not that it's so good compared to what we've got everywhere else, but that aside, I've got fiber optic to the house, and it's just killing me. Okay, technical glitches aside, we can see that the Australian dollar is, like in my world, I prefer using US dollar stable coins.
yeah.
Why? Because it's the best of the worst fiat. So all fiats are crap in my mind, and if I've got to use a fiat, why not use the best of all the worst? And so in a first world nation, I'm still using someone else's currency. I'm not doing it to dodgy tax. Everything's transparent. Everything's on chain. I declare everything. I don't want any problems. But why would I trade in a crappy dollar when I could trade in a better crappy dollar, if that makes sense? But of course, then this links back to the digital ID and CBDCs. To me, it seems perfectly logical. So you need to grip up the narrative. You need to grip up the currency, and then you need to grip up the control of both the narrative and the currency. And it all links to the technology that we have available to us. We have both the Internet of Information and now the Internet of Value, and it's all coming together. At the same time, you can see many nations are pulling away from what the American deal, if you will. We'll give you pieces of paper, IOUs. You give us back all the money that we printed, and so we'll print money out of thin air. We'll buy your real stuff with our fake money. Then to get that fake money back, we'll give you an IOU, and then we'll pay interest on that fake money with more printed fake money, to the point that we're now at $38 trillion in debt. The world is turning around. I'm going to say I'm talking about the United States. We're now at the point where the world is saying, well, hang on a second, I'm not really interested in your dollar anymore. And I think in my mind, the final nail in the coffin for the United States dollar was, in fact, when they put sanctions on Russia and they said, hey, we're cutting you out of the SWIFT network. Now, whether you say that's a good or a bad thing, it showed the world that all of the money that you're using from America is, in fact, just an IOU, or just really a permission slip. It's a permission slip. Do as we say, and we'll allow you to use the money. But if you don't do as we say, we're cutting you out of the network. Okay, so it links to, it all does come together in my mind. I'm of the impression that all fiats everywhere are going to fail. I'm of the impression that the narrative is losing its grip. I'm of the impression that governments are aware of this to the extent that they're now cracking down on it. I'm concerned for you, Martin, being in the United Kingdom, speaking up. Like, I still don't know how you're able to speak so freely when I see people arrested for tweets. The most concerning one I've seen, Martin, when we can talk about controlling the narrative, is that there was a woman. Now, I can only go off what I've seen, but it was on Piers Morgan, and there was a lot of talk about it, and the lady came forward. She was sexually assaulted by a man, and the man got a certain amount of time, and then she texted to her friend about the person who sexually assaulted her, and she called him a name. And she got more time, as I understand it, in prison for insulting her sexual assaulter than the sexual assaulter did for sexually assaulting her. And it's terrifying to me to think that, so a guy can essay a woman and he can get less time in a prison cell for the woman who calls that essayer, I've got to be careful with my words here, a word. Now, when she called him a word, it wasn't a racial word, and she didn't do it on social media. She did it in a private text. So are you concerned that this whole house of cards is going to collapse shortly, with money collapsing, freedom of speech collapsing, perhaps your platform collapsing, my platform collapsing? What's your fear, my friend?
Well, I think there is a general concern about how this is going to play out into the future. Let's just talk about the financial collapse. It was interesting that Jerome Powell, of course, in the week cut interest rates further in the US, the Fed, when in fact inflation is still significantly above its target, and they're not expecting to come back into target for the next couple of years. And there were three dissenters, two of whom wanted to have no change, and the other one wanted a 50 basis point cut because he was the Trump plant, as it were, on the Fed board. But the real significant announcement of that meeting was not the rate cut, but it was the fact they're going to actually buy more treasuries. So they're actually now increasing the Federal Reserve balance sheet again, right? Having gone up, taken it down, they're now going to build it again. And that tells you something about the liquidity crunch. Now, that if you look carefully at repos are under pressure. There's a significant amount of concern about the way that the liquidity in the US is flowing. Plus, of course, you mentioned stable coins. We've now got the Treasury effectively going around the Fed via the stable coins and selling treasuries to stablecoin holders. So, more liquidity. So don't expect inflation to come back. So inflationary pressures are there, will stay, and probably get worse. In Australia, of course, the RBA is now saying, next rate move may well be up. And in fact, the markets are saying up. So inflationary pressures are still going. That tells you that the monetary system is definitely on the brink. And by the way, if you look at Japanese bond yields, or indeed long-term yields around the world, they're going up. That's another signal. Higher inflation. So the financial system as defined, particularly in the Western mind, is definitely under huge pressure. And my own perspective here is that it's going to muddle through for the next little while, but this sort of continued money printing, which is what's happening, will continue to put inflationary pressures, more dollars, that reduces the value of the dollar, as you know. The other point, of course, is private debt continues to rise very dramatically. A lot of mortgage lending in many countries, but in Australia, of course, particularly for investment properties. So the combination of government debt printing and also private debt printing creates more liquidity, reduces the value of your dollar, and is tipping us more and more close to the annihilation of Western currencies, in my view. So we need an alternative, as we've discussed on many occasions. Now, the fact of the matter is, of course, that there are people in very senior positions who are profiting marvelously from this play. Rise in crypto values in some areas, a bit wobbly at the moment, but and also stable coins and other things. And I come back to this fundamental point. All of this pressure on the economy is creating a two-speed world where you've got some people doing marvelously well, others doing not well at all. And in fact, in the press conference this week, Powell was asked specifically about the K-shaped recovery, or the K-shape between the haves and the have-nots, between the ones who are doing really well and the ones who are not. And he conceded that actually those who are doing quite well are spending a lot more than everybody else. A lot of other people are struggling. We see that in the data, and we see that in Australia too. So we have an economic system that's not fit for purpose. It's not serving the ordinary people very well, but it's making other people very rich. And postscript, the AI revolution is really a speculative revolution where some people are making massive amounts of money, others losing a lot. Look at Oracle and what's happened there, and for example, with the share price down and the debt considerably up. So there's a big question mark about this whole issue. But then they've got the political issue as well. So we've touched on the financial. The political issue is this nature of states and the world order. And, what are we seeing? And Trump is cozying up to Russia because he wants to do business with Russia at a commercial level, whatever the political fallout of that may be, and that's going to have significant impacts. What about China? China is actually asserting itself and continuing to invest big in a lot of different areas too. So we've got these global power plays going on as well, and the BRICS, of course, talking about alternative currencies and gold, all those things. So that's one of the reasons why we are seeing this flight to quality, particularly gold and silver, because, investors are saying we don't trust the dollar, we don't trust the political environment, we don't trust central banks. What do we go to? We go to gold, silver. And it's interesting that central banks around the world, particularly in the East Asia area, but also elsewhere too, are buying more gold. That's one of the reasons why the demand for gold is high, and that's why the price is high. Because it's all part of this same unstable environment that we've created. Now, you asked me a question, can I talk about this stuff? Well, I do talk about it. I try to be polite about it, because I do think that some of the stuff that people get holed up for is because they are just being quite rude about individuals and calling people names. You've got to be careful with that. But the fundamental philosophical issues that we're touching on here, which is the nature of society, the nature of power, the flows of money, the winners and the losers, and the political environment around that is something that we have to talk about, because unfortunately in the mainstream, it's not being discussed. But for me, this is a critical issue that we need to understand. As I always say, remember, the future is always open. We can change things, but only if we understand how things are and if we understand what can be an alternative.
What's the biggest threat to all of us? War, fiscal collapse, governments, ourselves, pandemic? What is it? What scares you?
Well, I don't think that governments work for the people. That, for me, is the critical. There's a lot of, there's political risk and there's economic risk and there's pandemic risk, and we've got, issues with, super bugs that don't respond to treatment. All those things are there. But at the end of the day, I think government's lost its way, right? What is government for? What's it there for? It seems to me that government should be there to enable people to have prosperous lives and to provide the right level of support to be able to make effectively the world work for ordinary people. That's what they should be there for. But actually, they're captured by big corporates. They're captured by, frankly, some politicians with relatively limited understanding of what's really going on. They're captured by some of the international top-down dictates from the World Economic Forum and elsewhere. Thou shalt do this, thou shalt do CBDC, thou shalt whatever, right? Because there are technocrats who believe they know best and want to rule the world. And let me say that some of the policies that we see being manifested in Australia at the moment are actually stabled from international unelected players like the World Economic Forum. That's a big issue, right? So where is the political nous to look after the local communities? I believe that we have to move from more centralization to more distribution, right? Just as in the money world, right? I believe that we should be looking for more local community control and responsibility and turn the whole story upside down. I've maybe used this analogy before. We've got this pyramidal top down, thou shalt, politicians at the top, big business people at the top, and ordinary people down the bottom being crushed. We've got to turn it around and say, no. In the future, individuals should actually be in the driving seat, and we should have it working the other way. So the political system and the economic system and the business system is a supporter and an enabler of us having a prosperous future. Now that twist around is what I think we need to do. That, for me, is the cornerstone of all the other issues we've got.
So from here, so we're rolling out the ban for the under-16s. We're rolling out a digital ID. We're rolling out a CBDC, perhaps. My belief is that the United States is going to flick the switch on stablecoins to be a global CBDC. Watch this space. I stand by that prediction, even though I hope and pray that I'm completely wrong. Let's bring it back to Australia. From here, we've got the under-16 ban. What's the next step? Do they crank it up so we all have to prove that we're who we say we are? Do I go to a shop and say, I'm Adam Stokes, can I please have a digital ID? How does it work?
Well, at the moment, it's not clear exactly how this is going to play out, of course. As I said, there's a series of guidance, going back to this slide that I showed you earlier on. This is the next stage in the journey. I'll have to tell you that I don't think a lot has been made public about what happens beyond that. Remember that the RBA is doing some tests around central bank digital currencies. It's not seen as central to their mandate at the moment, but they are still doing it. And I come back to this simple observation that governments want more power. Governments feel that they're losing power and control, and governments will do more things. So you need a digital ID. They would love you to have your digital ID, the government issued digital ID. If you don't have it, you can't do things. And you may remember, I think it was last year, there was a big debate about this. And they pretty much committed to saying a digital ID a government digital ID will not be mandatory. There will always be alternative paths for those people who don't want or can't use technology. There will be other ways. Now, if you actually see what's really happening in practice, that is becoming less and less true. So more and more, if you want to participate in society, you will need that digital ID, that government owned, that government initiated, that government controlled digital ID to do anything. And that's the sort of the next logical step in all of this. So I think that that there will be tests, and the High Court will probably throw out the appeals. We'll see. I don't know. But this idea of the government issuing a digital ID, which is the hook along which everything else is built, I think that's pretty much stitched in. It's a matter of when.
I've got a good fiscal question here that I'm going to pass to you, noting that we don't give financial advice here, but it's an interesting question from Atlas. He says, Adam and Martin, we'll go with Martin. What are your thoughts on the people who take themselves to the financial property loan limits to access equity and purchase precious metals or crypto, benefiting the system or more damage? So as I interpret that question, taking out equity of your home loan to go buy gold or Bitcoin, your thoughts?
Well, I've always had the view that debt is something that you probably through your life will have to come up against, but you shouldn't be building your financial future on more and more debt. Why? Because ultimately debt has to be repaid. Now, it's very interesting in my surveys, a number of people say, no, I am going to be in debt for the whole of my life. When I die, my estate can extinguish the debt. I don't care, right? First point. Second point, the way that the world has been developed and the financial system has developed, they want you to take more debt. It's engineered. Why? Because banks, as they get bigger, can lend more. Their balance sheets get bigger. So they want you to take more debt. They want you to take debt for your HEX, for example. They want you to get debt for your car and for your home. So you are playing within the system because that's what they want you to do. Now, obviously, they're saying, well, we don't want you to over-indebted yourself. But the average household in Australia has more debt per household than ever. And those, of course, it's not equally distributed. There are some people who don't have debt. I don't have debt. I've been debt-free for years and years and years and will never, ever get in debt again. But if you go down the debt path and go out to the max, sure, you can make money on the way through. So you're playing within the systems it currently works at the moment. And I understand that. And if you can manage it and you can control the interest payments and you actually make more value out of it, then you're playing within the system, and that's perfectly legal. But just understand the risks. Just understand the possibility that interest rates could go a lot higher. Remember 18%? Back a couple of decades ago, we had a very significant spike in interest rates when we had a very significant recession in Australia. What happens then? And the other point is, if you're going to leverage up to buy assets, you better be sure that those assets are going to go up in value into the future. Because the worst thing you want is a huge amount of debt and no value growth on the back of it. And I don't know about you, but there are some asset classes that look to me to be quite wobbly. AI stocks in particular would seem to be in that class.
One of my properties, I've got a pretty big property portfolio, but one of them in a certain state, didn't grow. And of course you can claim depreciation and you can claim this and that, but it was just a bad move. And it was only because I offset with all my other houses that it was okay. But it was an example of that type of debt was horrific. And you and I have agreed on this in the past. There is nothing better than being debt-free. I remember when I became debt-free, I can't express the psychological burden that was lifted off my shoulders, the knowing that I owned everything. And everything in my possession was in my possession. And what it also taught me, Martin, is that if I want to walk away from a job or a government or a Centrelink payment or anywhere from anything where money is coming in, I don't need any of it. I don't need any of that input from an employer, from the government, from doing what I'm told. And this is the big, I guess, realization I learnt about wealth. Wealth is freedom. wealth is freedom because then you have choices. Wealth gives you choices, but then we go a step further. Well, maybe I can't even be free with wealth anymore because I can't speak and I'm not allowed to think because they're controlling the narrative. And then we've got all these IDs. So, we think of freedom in the last, millennia as battlefronts of men lining up on the battlefield fighting for their freedom. And now it seems to be this new digital freedom. Your thoughts?
Well, we had through history a long, slow march of the evolution of freedom, right? And if you go back, if you go through 304 years back, you were subservient to the lord of the manor or whatever, right? And then through history, there was the Industrial Revolution and what have you. So we've always had different manifestations of society. How free were people in these various manifestations of society? I would argue that actually freedom is always at best marginal, because there are always constraints. If you are going to be part of society and in society, in the Industrial Revolution, you had to move from the country to the city. You actually had to go and work in the factories to be able to actually earn a crust, right? Or more recently, you have to go to the office and you have to work to live to it. And I always come back to this really weird conundrum. You have to work to earn, to eat, to live, to work, to earn, to eat. That's that cycle. That is a never-ending cycle, and unfortunately, it is the nature of being alive, right? Because effectively, you've got to go through that. Now, what's happened is that we overlaid this with a lot of extra things like this debt issue, plus this huge aspiration to have more stuff and own more things. And I sometimes wonder whether this sort of consumer society that's been created, and I would blame the US for creating the mechanisms, credit cards and things, which has then flowed out through. So people have become more and more, I need, I must, I need more stuff. Right, we'll lend you more then. So let's put some credit card debt on there as well, and you can service that. So you become effectively completely locked in to this continued dance of working to eat, to pay the debt, and all that sort of stuff. Now, is that a good outcome for individuals and households and people? It's an interesting question. I wonder whether sometimes a simpler life is a better life. I mean, I've cut back dramatically on a lot of things because I was not prepared to play that dance with this idea of having to service all that debt to keep going. In fact, earlier in my life, I was leveraged up quite dramatically. I had a big house, a big mortgage, and we had additional leverage, and we actually made quite a lot of investments in the stock market. We did quite well, but it was clear to me that the risks of continuing that got bigger and bigger. So I then swapped out and reversed it and got rid of it all. So, but there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? There's no such thing as the ability to be able to say, well, I can live on my own. I don't need anybody. I don't need anything. I don't need water. I don't need power. I don't need, well, you do need food, the things you need. So we are by definition constrained by the fact that we need certain things. But I still would argue that there are choices people can make. And sometimes the choices that I see people making, I have one-to-one conversations with people who are thinking about buying a property, for example. And one of the really interesting conversation points there is about the aspiration they have to buy a particular type of property. And almost always it's, I want to buy the biggest property I can with the biggest lands area that I can, with the biggest mortgage that I can. And so we go through that conversation and we ask, well, why? Why do you think that's, I don't tell them what to do, don't give financial advice, but it's very interesting just listening to people trying to weigh up that. Now, sometimes it's better to say, well, let's just trim back our aspirations a little and go for something a little smaller, a little more manageable. And just one other point, a lot of property investors that I work with, when they actually stand back and look at all the cash flows, all the money in, all the money out, they actually are losing money. So the property investment that they think they're making huge amounts out of, they're not, because there are lots of other costs that they're not including in their sort of mental calculation when they actually come to thinking about what the property flow is actually like. So there are always other stories to tell. What I want people to do is to have the freedom to do X or to do Y. There shouldn't be you must leverage up to the hilt if you want to survive, which is what's happening for many people at the moment. There should be alternatives. But unfortunately, we seem to be taking those options and alternatives out and going back to this control idea. The government's got a particular view of the world. They want to impose that world view on you. They want you to just go on working till you drop and get a lot of debt. And that means that the banks will be fine and the big corporates will be fine and the government will get more taxes, so they're happy. But are individuals happy? And I'd come back to the question, measuring GDP as a success of an economy is dumb. We should be measuring the happiness of our people. And on that basis, I think people are a lot less happy than they were.
If we were measuring a GDP on the basis of happiness, I think we'd be broke, sadly, even when it comes to hope. I was thinking about what you're saying when you're downsizing and you're getting rid of everything. I think about when I lived in Korea, I had two houses, well, not houses, two boxes in Korea, and they were literally probably as big as my bedroom here in Australia, and it was my entire house. When I lived on base in the military, I had very small rooms. When I lived on campus at university, I had just a room. And they were some of the happiest times of my life. Now, where I live here, I've got two houses on one block and a swimming pool and a huge garage and, mo money, mo problems. And I've got the dogs and the chickens and the cats and the fish ponds and look, it's an estate. But when I think in my life, I'm like, when was the happiest in my life? It was actually on campus at university, where I didn't even have a garage. I had to park my car just out in the open air, and that simplicity was so much fun. When I lived in Korea, actually, the same as when I lived in Spain, I had no car, and I even remember sharing a room with someone in Spain, and they were some of the happiest times of my life. Genuinely, the happiest times of my life. I asked this question of you when it comes to the Australian government recently cut 20% off student loans. Why did they do that? So I didn't get 20% off my loan. It didn't build more houses. It didn't get rid of debt for students. It didn't make the students more employable. It didn't really take 20% off a big loan. So if you owe $100,000 or $50,000, now you owe $80,000 or $40,000. It doesn't make a big difference. So my question is this. You've got all of these problems in Australia. I'd say housing is the number one. Health services are a problem. Education is a problem. Transport, roads, all of these things are a problem. It's like, right, what we're going to do is we're going to pay for, because they said we're going to wipe the debt. Well, no, my taxes are going to pay for, the bricklayer is going to pay for the underwater basket weaver's degree. No.
Remember that
Talk to me.
Student debt is not really debt because it's paid from future income at a certain level. So it's effectively a tax. So what they've done is they've reduced effectively the future tax take from those people with student debts. That's what they've done, right? It was a big beat up, right? Remember, this is all about announcables. Announcables are things that you can turn out and say, see, we're doing this wonderful stuff, aren't we great? That was an announceable, right? It had very, very little to do with anything. Sure, it means that
Hang on, let me just push back on that a little bit. Universities get paid for education. So when I attend university, I've got a triple degree and a master's.
Yeah.
The universities got paid for that. Now, I acknowledge what you said. Hang on, that comes out of my future taxes.
Yeah.
The money was going to the universities. The universities didn't wipe the debt. The government wiped the debt. And the government wiped the debt by, they still pay for the universities. Happy to be corrected here. Well, the universities still get paid.
No, there's no change to that. So that hasn't changed the amount that the universities spent to give you your degree.
That's my point.
It's the future cash flow. In other words, it's the amount that you are going to pay in future tax based on your future cash flow that's changed. It's not real debt.
Hang on a second. Let's break this down. Let's keep the numbers simple. I owe the university $100,000. Okay, so let's say I do multiple degrees.
Listen, if you don't actually generate significant income, that debt gets wiped, right? Over time.
No, that debt doesn't get paid back to the government, but the university still got paid.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the universities still get paid.
Yeah.
So where did the money come from to pay from the universities? The universities get paid up front. The universities don't get paid 20 years down the track.
No.
Yeah, so I'm actually standing by, happy to be corrected, but I'm standing by my understanding. So I go to university, and the university gets $100,000. The $100,000 comes from
the universities. So there's two things, right? There's money to the universities for the courses, and there's your grants for living, while you're at university, or accommodation or whatever, right? Those two.
That's things. Commercial, yeah.
Yeah. The point there is that the government gives the universities so much money as a grant to the university based on the number of students, etc., etc. That hasn't changed at all. So that money came out of government at the time that you were at university, right?
Yep. So the university got paid for my position at university.
Yeah.
And the university got paid by the government
at the time.
Yes.
So there's no liability back between the government and the university for what happened then. What they're doing now is imposing an extra tax take on you into the future. So a student loan isn't really a student loan. It should be it's a student tax take or tax deduction or whatever, or an additional. So because it's done
for a HEX loan.
Yeah, for a HEX loan.
For a HEX loan.
Yeah, it's not.
So
really,
it is a loan.
It's not really a loan. No, it's not. I disagree with you. It's been positioned as a loan.
Hang on.
But really,
if I don't get a HEX debt, so for the international viewers, HEX, you got HEX and Help. It's basically a student loan. So I go to university and the government says, we will fund your spot at the university. Cool. But once you start earning a certain amount of money, we're going to add it onto your taxes, which basically we're going to force you to repay this loan with the money that you earn in the future. Now, if you don't get a job that pays it back, we still hold that debt, but we've already paid the debt because we paid in advance to the universities.
They just forego the future taxes.
The future taxes is a repayment on the debt.
No, it's not.
Yes,
We're not going to agree on this because
it absolutely is.
It's a fundamental philosophical point. The way that it's been positioned is it's a loan. The truth is that it's not really a loan. It's a tax play, right? Because of the timing issues, right? So effectively, what it means is if you don't earn enough, you will never repay your loan.
I concur.
Yes.
I will never repay the loan,
Correct.
but the government's already paid the money to the universities.
Yes. So it came out of government coffers at that point. It was never.
Exactly.
It wasn't a loan. It was paid to the university. It's not a loan. It's not
Where
a loan.
Where did the government get the money from?
The current taxes paid for that university. Your future taxes. The future taxes government will then take income back, but it is not to repay that loan. It is a future inheritance on the tax that you pay. It's
the university things. The university got the money today.
Correct. The university got money today.
Where did the government get them
from? Current taxes.
Exactly. Yeah. You've proven my point. So the bricklayer today funded my spot at university today with his taxes.
So the future taxes.
Exactly. Where did the taxes come from? The taxes came from the people.
Yes.
So I think we're all arguing the same point here. Can we concur? We've never disagreed on anything. This is fantastic. So the viewers out here, Martin and I have been working together for years. Actually, I suppose we disagree on Bitcoin, but I brought you around to that, so I'm going to bring you around to this. We're doing this with love, everyone. Again, happy to be corrected. Can we concur that irrespective of what the student does in the future, can we agree that the university gets paid for my course?
Yes, from the government.
Okay, so...
by the way, so they also charge other people, international students. But yes, absolutely.
Yeah, we'll park them aside, absolutely.
Yeah,
so we agree that the university gets funded for my course. So I do a degree in underwater basket weaving. The university gets, I say that a bit of tongue in cheek because there's a lot of stupid degrees now. STEM, I've got no issue with, but for dance studies, hey, you can learn how to dance, but why do you have to get a HEX debt for it? But that aside. So I go to university, I do dance studies. The university gets paid, so the university is paid. We agree on that.
Mm.
We agree that the money to pay that degree came from today's government's taxes, saying, here you go, university, Adam Stokes is doing dance studies. Here's the $30,000 for his course. We agree on that.
Yep.
And then we agree that if Adam Stokes then gets a really good dance job, or any job, it doesn't have to be in dance, it can be anything, where I start to earn a certain amount of money, I then I've got my normal taxes, and then I have additional taxes to pay back what you don't call a loan, but I absolutely call a loan. I pay back the government because they've already funded my spot at university.
It's a future tax obligation that you have, but if you don't earn enough, you will never, ever pay it off. So
I agree.
It is not really
I
a loan
agree
in that sense. It is a future tax obligation. What they've done is reduced that future tax obligation. So you asked the question, how does it work? They've reduced the future tax obligation. So it just means that people will pay less.
On the individual.
Yes.
But the taxpayer today still funded the university course.
No change.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the taxpayer has paid the we agree that the university got paid.
Yeah.
The university, they're like, sweet, we got paid. The individual, they're like, sweet, my future obligation has been reduced by 20%.
Yeah.
But what we can't see eye to eye on is that the university got paid by someone or something. And you say, well, they got paid by the taxpayer today or the government today. And I say, well, where'd the government get the money from today? Well, the government today got the money from A, either printing it, or B, taxing it.
Yep.
So then we say, why did they do this? And I think we agree on this as well. They bought future votes.
That's right.
So what could have that money been better used on? Or was it purely just a vote grab? Or were they actually making the country a better place?
There's no immediate drop in the amount of government income. It means that over time, it'll go down a little because of that 20%. But it's not like there's suddenly a big hole created by doing it. That's the beauty of this. So from a government perspective, it didn't cost them a thing, right? Because it's all in the future. What they've done is to make a big announceable so they can say, yeah, well, aren't we great people? And, and it's but it doesn't actually, from a pure economic perspective, it has no impact on government coffers in the short term.
Let's do another experiment. Some have said, why couldn't the government do this for all you taxpayers out there? No, another one. It was business owners. All you business owners out there, we're reducing your tax liabilities by 20%. And I think I've already answered your question, or my question to you. It's going to be because then the government would reduce its tax revenue today by 20%. Whereas you're saying they're going to reduce potentially the Liberal government's tax revenue.
Correct. 30 years down the track.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is.
Yeah.
That's why
I see what you're saying.
It's not really a student loan. I mean, it's positioned as a student loan, but actually it's not a good definition. And well, like I say, a lot of people worry about student debt, HEX debt, right? The truth is that if you never earn enough, you'll never have to pay it off. So it's only under certain circumstances. If you earn a lot, you can pay it off quicker and that costs you less. But it isn't the same as a standard loan, right? And that's what I wanted to sort of underscore. This is and that's why this, from a politics perspective, beautiful announceable, because it sounds great until you start thinking about it and think, well, hang on a moment, it's actually meaningless.
Well, where I get pissed off, Martin, is that the universities still get paid. And I gave this analogy on my channel. Okay, so let's say they did it for Toyota owners. So everyone who bought a Toyota today, okay, if you just do it as a HEX model. So I get a new Toyota RAV4 today. The loan, or we won't call it a loan, we'll call it the HEX Toyota scheme. they fund Toyota. So Toyota gets the money today, and then it's paid off by my future self if I earn a certain amount. Toyota wins in this case because no matter what, Toyota gets paid. Now, I acknowledge if I don't earn enough money, I don't pay back the Toyota loan. But if I do earn enough money, I do pay back the Toyota loan that was paid by the government. But in any case, the people still pay, and the university, or in this analogy, Toyota still gets paid. Where I get pissed off with this, Martin, it actually comes back down to the misinformation and disinformation bill. There was 4 areas that could talk: the banks, the media, the government, the universities. And I can't help to think, conspiracy tinfoil hat on, it's like, well, who wins out of all of this? Well, the government will always win because they're in the center of it all, and they get to make the laws and they control the narrative. The banks win because they've got fractional reserve lending and they get to lobby the government. The media will win because it's just doing what it's told because it's paid by whoever's got the money to say the narrative, just to say the thing. But at the end of it, the universities also win because they're getting paid no matter what, whether the individual pays it back or not. It doesn't matter. They got the money up front. They got the international students. They got the protection by the government. And what they also have is, I would argue, is that, again, tinfoil hat on, is that they're now in the position of the grooming grounds, per se, of forming the narrative. And this goes back to the misinformation and disinformation bill. Only those 4 groups were allowed to speak. The example, I gave the Toyota example, is like, well, why don't all Toyota loan holders get 20% off their loan? It's because they've got nothing to do with forming the narrative. When we look at the Australian National University as an example, there's a report coming out. I find it so ironic that they were, don't quote me on the exact numbers, it's all public, but there are a lot of money in debt, billions of dollars in debt. So they've got international students coming in, paying a lot more money in advance. They've got government-backed loans or help or HECS or whatever word we want to use for it. And it's one university of many universities that I find it quite ironic. We pay them to teach us business. We pay them to teach us accounting, but they can't balance their own budgets. And I'm like, why on earth? It'd be like me paying a PT, a personal trainer, who's a blue-haired it doesn't have to be blue-haired, but just a land whale who doesn't look after their health. Why would I pay you to keep me fit when you're not fit? Why would I pay a university to learn how to balance budgets when your budgets aren't balanced? And why would I employ, per se, a democratically elected government who takes away my democratic rights? Big rant, your thought as we're going over time here.
Well, look, the bottom line is the government will never pay back its debt. It will always build bigger and bigger and bigger debt. Why? Because that's the nature of the beast. And the bottom line is that it's going to become harder and harder and harder for the government to be able to cover the cost of its debt with interest rates being high. And there is no real wish from governments to do less. Governments want to do more. They want to actually occupy ever more. And if you look at the GDP and the proportion of GDP that is actually from the government sector, it's as bigger than it's almost ever been, right? So that's the problem we've got. The difficulty is that debt sucks activity and investment potential out of the economy because you can't actually do things with it. And so you chuck 300 and something billion at AUKUS and you service the, I think I saw in the UK, the amount on debt being paid at the moment is more than on defence, I think, in the UK at the moment. Just to give you a bit of a quantum, right? So that's the problem we've got. There is no intent from those in power ever to right-size their budgets. They won't do it. It is the nature of the beast. So we have a situation where governments know that is the case. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to admit it, but is the case. So what that means is we are in this one-way street to infinite debt until such time as the dollar breaks. That's where we are.
Leave us with hope, Martin. You always give me some hope at the end of our discussions. To the viewers out there, I go on Martin's channel, he comes on my channel. We come from different backgrounds, but we share the same values. And we're always up for a good debate, and we're always seeking the truth, and we're always seeking a better future for those around us. So I'm disheartened by the social media ban.
Yeah.
I'm disheartened by endless debt. I'm disheartened by endless money printing. I'm disheartened by discounts on future debt or future payments. Can can you make me feel better, Martin? Give me some wisdom. You're not much older than me, but tell me something in, in your more life experience than mine to make me feel better. Give me hope.
All right. So three points of hope. The first is for those youngsters who are off social media now, go out and enjoy the real world. Go out and smell the roses, take a walk, go and play in the mud. I'll tell you, you're going to enjoy that a lot more than sitting in front of a little screen. There's nothing worse that I see that kids walking to school with their screen in front of them as they go along. It's ridiculous. Get off those screens. It's not good for anybody, right? First point. Second point, as I said earlier on, the future is genuinely malleable, right? However things are today, they don't have to be like that. They can be different, but only if we, one, understand what's really going on, and two, begin to actually push for change. And what I try to do on this channel, and I think you do too, Adam, is to try and help people understand more about what's actually going on, right? Because this is the first part of the journey, right? And it's really important to understand there are alternative futures out there if we choose to go down that route. And that takes you into, so what does that mean in terms of politics and economics, all those things, right? The third thing to highlight is what's really important. Just think about what's really, really important. Because I believe that social interaction, real social interaction, having friends and family is the center point of society. And I think we're losing that in all of this too. So the final point, I'd say, do a little bit of an audit about what's good and what's not good, but celebrate the good, because there is still good there. There is still good out there. And sometimes I think we get down into this doom spiral of saying, oh, no, it's all terrible and I can't do anything about it. And it's the government's fault and social media is the problem, blah, 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 right? The truth is, grab the good bits, celebrate them, and build on them.
Next week, I'm going away for 4 days. What you've just said has inspired me, and I thank you for that, because I've told my audience, I said, imagine I'm not going to pick up my phone for 4 days. But it was as you were speaking then, when you're talking about, touch mud, touch grass, get dirty, and be a kid again. Don't walk with your bloody phone in your hand. I see it all the time, especially like you run into people and they just walk straight into you, young and old, because they're just looking at their phone. But I'm actually going to challenge myself, Martin. I had planted the seed, but I think you just watered it. I think what I'm going to do, next week I go away to the coast for 4 days. It's the first time I've had a holiday in as long as I can remember. I'm going to step up to the challenge. I don't know if I can do it. I'm going to try. I'm making the declaration. I'm going to try and turn off my phone for 4 days. I'm going to do the experiment where I don't look at my phone for 4 days, and I will report back to my viewers and to you, my friend, to say how it went and to see how I feel, because sometimes I concur. We get into a doom scrolling and an echo chamber where the bad news, the bad algorithms seem to just inject themselves into our soul. So I appreciate your wisdom and I appreciate your kind words. I appreciate the debate and I appreciate your time. If people want to learn more from you, where do they go?
So my YouTube channel is called Walk the World, and I've got digitalfinanceanalytics.com, which is my blog, and I'm on DFA Analyst. And I will say one little trick: remember that you can put your phone to turn off or go silent for a certain period of the day. I have 6 hours when my phone is available. The rest of the time, it's not available. And I'll tell you what, that gives me a lot of time to do the things like walk the dogs and do other things. So, it's a bit of personal discipline.
You don't listen to podcasts whilst you're walking the dogs?
No.
Wow. I only mention that because all of that time is receive mode for me. I'm learning so much.
It used to be for me, but there are times when it's actually good to just disconnect. When I go for the walk with the dogs, I'm out listening to the trees and the squirrels and the birds and, all those things.
Well, look, I might try practicing that. I'll start with 12 hours, then 8 hours. I'll wean myself off it. I'm just surrounded by technology everywhere.
There is more, and it come back to the social web. There's much, much more to life than social media, right? The world doesn't stop when you come off social media. Actually, the world starts when you actually remember that there's a real world out there.
Powerful words. The world doesn't stop. Actually, the world starts. Martin North, I very much appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me.
See ya.